Have FIFA and Qatari officials really kept their word when it comes to workers' rights? Well, I spoke with Jules Boykoff, who helped me take stock. He's an associate political science professor at Pacific University, which is just outside Portland in Oregon. He's also written extensively on major sporting events like this and the Olympic Games and their legacy of what's called sports washing, which is a term we'll get to in just a moment. And one more thing, for him, this is personal. He used to play pro soccer and was a member of the U.S. men's under-23 national team. I have so many questions for you, but maybe can I start with, like now that FIFA fever is sort of enveloping the world, is there even a single word that could possibly encapsulate how you feel heading into the tournament?
I'm going to coin a new word, Andrew. It's complex-flicted. I think it's a complex situation, and I'm feeling quite conflicted about it.
Tell me about that. What's the seed of that feeling?
I'm really conflicted about this because of the human rights situation in Qatar, because of the situation around LGBTQ people in Qatar, because of the situation around women in Qatar. So I'm really conflicted that this incredible soccer tournament featuring the most famous and impressive footballers around the world is going to be ensconced in this complex and really kind of disappointing human rights situation.
So that's a couple times now that you've brought up human rights. So let's just dive right into it. Can you, the narrative over the last decade or so has been that this is crazy, right? That Qatar would have been chosen to host the World Cup. And can you paint that picture for me? Exactly how crazy town was this from the get-go?
Well, a lot of people in the soccer world were extraordinarily surprised when Qatar was given the World Cup back in 2010. A lot of eyebrows were raised around the globe, and that's in part because the country doesn't have a long and reputable history of soccer culture. It's a pretty small country, and this is a huge event. And so a lot of people were wondering, are they going to be able to pull this off? I don't think there was any question that they were going to be able to do it in terms of money. This is a petrol state with loads of cash just sitting around, ready to be sopped up in these kind of projects.
But when it comes to how that story has unfolded, I mean, the Qataris, they're not idiots, right? I mean, they would have known from the outset that they would be, yes, to your point, inviting wealth into the country and the prestige, but they also knew that they would be inviting this sort of international scrutiny, right, in terms of the conditions of people on the ground. What would have gone into that calculation, do you think?
This is a chance to engage in sports washing. When political leaders use sports events to appear important or legitimate on the world stage while stoking nationalism inside of the country and potentially deflecting attention from chronic problems like the way migrant workers are treated. Well, it didn't turn out that way because the global media has really made an issue of this, and rightly so, I think. This is a human rights issue. But it's certainly put Qatar on the map. And even if you get all this flack from international media around this World Cup, this is still an incredible opportunity for Qatar to make connections in the business world. And that's a really important part of sports washing that a lot of people forget, is that it's actually these sports washers use mega events like the World Cup to create national prestige that in turn helps convey economic and political advancement. This is a chance to cut some deals and look important in the business community.
But just to be clear here, for all the benefits, there's a really high cost that the people on the ground are paying.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. We cannot forget about that. That is crucial as we move into the World Cup, especially once the matches begin and all the attention goes onto these amazing athletes. But let's not forget that many people have actually died while constructing these stadiums that we'll be watching these matches in. Around 36 people have died making the stadiums. The Guardian did a report that found that 6,500 people died in the country since they got the World Cup in 2010, just that were migrant laborers working under difficult conditions. They didn't necessarily have to do with the World Cup, but that's an enormous amount of human toll that we're talking about, and those people cannot be forgotten. Now, if you talk to the people in Qatar, they will tell you, well, we've revised our kafala system or our worker sponsorship system, And it's true, they did.
Hey, it's me. I just want to be clear about what Jules is talking about when he refers to the kafala system. So in Arabic, kafala means guaranteed or to take care of. And it's basically this system where, you know, private companies or even individuals employ foreigners and they pay for their travel, their housing, but because the system falls under the jurisdiction of interior ministries rather than labor ministries, workers have no protection under local laws. Now, think about what that means. Like in most situations, private citizens, rather than the state, have complete control over the employee, including like when and whether they can leave the country or even the workplace itself. Critics call it modern-day slavery.
You know, in 2017, they started working with the International Labor Organization, and by 2020, they passed a law revising some of the most strictest standards inside of the kafala system. They even say that they've gotten rid of the kafala system. But here's the thing. A lot of the changes that they made are changes on paper. They don't actually affect the people on the ground who are doing the work. And what I mean by that is you can still be charged, if you're a migrant worker, with absconding, which means leaving your job without the permission of your employer. And that absconding can be weaponized into sending you out of the country.
Absconding is serious business in Qatar. You know, basically, it's anything construed as a betrayal of your employer, like not showing up for work or even working for someone else. An employee can be reported to the Search and Follow-up Department, that's what it's called, of the Ministry of Interior. And if found guilty, can be detained, fined, have their residency and contract terminated, lose their pay, and ultimately be deported. And anyone helping or sheltering that person can also be punished. All of those tools in an employer's hands equate to absolute power.
You are not allowed to organize strikes or anything that resembles a strike in a major way across ethnic groups that could be actually effective. That's still outlawed. And so while there's been a lot of changes on paper, in practice, people are still very much struggling. And in fact, this summer, AP reported that some 60 workers who are trying to gather up to do a strike or a labor action were just deported, many of them straight out of Qatar.
And you talk about all of these things that have happened while international eyes are focused and fixated squarely on that part of the world. And then I think, okay, well, what happens after everyone leaves?
That is such a great question and an important one that isn't asked enough. Whether it's the Olympics or the World Cup, the eyes of the world descend on these places, and there's enormous attention that's paid there. And what does happen afterwards? Well, evidence is pretty scant from social scientists such as myself that there are actually long-term improvements in these countries. One recent study that was in the American Political Science Review, for example, looked at what happened in Argentina, which hosted the World Cup in 1978. And in the lead-in to that World Cup in Argentina, they found that the government, which was highly repressive dictatorship, really dialed back its repression. And certainly during the moment of the actual World Cup, when the world's global press was there was almost no repression. But there was a rebound in repression of activists and dissidents immediately once all those journalists left. And so that's the big question that we'll have to see. Fortunately, we're looking at a situation now in Qatar where you have human rights groups that are dedicated to monitoring in the wake of this World Cup. And let's hope that they can keep the pressure up to continue to make positive changes for the workers, the women, the LGBTQ population inside of Qatar. But that said, I think that FIFA is one of the least equipped groups to deal with these kind of things, unfortunately. Basically, they act like a parastate that kind of hovers between state status and nonprofit status. A parastate that acts a whole lot like a parasite on the host country, whether it's Qatar, whether it's Russia before that, or whether it's Brazil before that. And so that's why I think it's really important moving out of this World Cup, if we can think about ways of having independent monitoring of FIFA, independent monitoring of the World Cup selection process, and FIFA just won't succumb to that at this point.
Jules, forgive me for ending on this question, but I have to ask. Are you going to watch?
I am going to watch, and here's why, Andrew. For starters, I'm a big supporter of these athlete workers. I know what it takes to put in the dedication to get yourself to that high level, and I just want to see these people shine, especially from the countries that maybe don't get as much exposure in the world system. But as I mentioned at the outset, I am conflicted about it. The way I am approaching this World Cup is that essentially I'm not going to devote myself to the death of complexity. I can both critique what's going on in the country and try to raise the profile of human rights violations, while at the same time support the athletes who are, as I say, athlete workers. And, there's a lot of promising signs that these athlete workers are going to speak out for justice. In other words, kind of try to piggyjack the event, hijack it for proper political purposes, for progressive political purposes that could leave a positive mark, not only on Qatar, but on FIFA as they consider who they're going to pick for future hosting.
Jules Boykoff, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.